Welcome, everybody. I am so excited about this session. I'm excited about all of them. I think I open every single session with saying, I am so excited. And that is the truth every time I say it. As you all know, this session is unlike our other sessions because all of our sessions so far have really been presented by homeschooling parents, whether there's someone currently homeschooling their children or someone like myself who has been a homeschooling parent and graduated their child from their homeschool. Today and right now during this session, titled Formerly Homeschooled and Loving Life, you are going to meet three former homeschool students. Well, actually two. The third is not here right now. They may pop on, but they're engaged in some. There was a time conflict. But we have two formerly homeschooled students, Gregory Wickham and Dr. Dannielle Joy Davis. And I want to tell you a little bit about both of our guests. So starting with Gregory. Gregory Wickham was a student at Stuyvesant High School who chose to engage in self-directed learning. Gregory runs NYC School Tech, a site where people can donate spare laptops and tablets to students in need. And he was a quarterfinalist in the 2014 Young Rewired State Festival of Code. Gregory is also an education writer. And as I was speaking earlier, before we let folks in, I actually interviewed Gregory last year, January of 2021, I believe, at the start of his homeschooling journey, where he's really engaged in a self-directed learning experience, beginning his, what would be considered his junior year in high school. And I reached out to him through his mother because I came across his writing. And it was this intense article that I actually had come across in one of my education groups on Facebook. And I was reading it and I was like, yes, this person is on point. They're telling it. And I looked to see who the author was. And it was Gregory Wickham, who at the time was a junior in high school. So Gregory Wickham is one of our guests, just completed their high school, homeschooling high school experience. And they are joined on the panel by one of my dear friends and a returner, has been with us each of our teach-ins, Dr. Dannielle Joy Davis. She is a tenured full professor of higher education at St. Louis University. She is the first known African-American woman descended from skilled captive Mende, Temne, and Fula people in the United States to earn tenure in the history of the institution's School of Education. A graduate of the University of Illinois, she has studied and conducted research in Ghana, South Africa, Senegal, Egypt, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Belgium. Her interdisciplinary research examines the experiences of marginalized groups in educational settings, the role of organizational policy, and the practice and promotion or inhibition of egalitarian academic and occupational outcomes, and spirituality in the workplace and other learning environments, excuse me. Dr. Davis was homeschooled as a child and is currently homeschooling her son. She is also featured in the Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars book, Homeschooling Black Children in the U.S., Theory, Practice, and Popular Culture, which you can see on our teach-in site, is for sale. It was presented in January of this year. And so we are so happy to have you, Dr. Joy and Gregory. How are you both feeling today? It's a Saturday. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to be here. Hello, everyone.
So
yeah, thank you for having us.
Oh, wonderful. So I think both of you have been interviewed by me. So you kind of, I hope that you feel comfortable with this conversation that we have today. And I hope that you're prepared. I'm going to ask folks who have tuned in for this session to begin putting your questions in the chat. and start asking questions. But I would love for Gregory, if you can start with just giving us a little bit of your story, starting with what led you to want to decide to homeschool, and what that homeschooling process has looked like for you for the past year and a half.
Okay, so for a long time, I knew that I wanted to homeschool because school was just, it was fine, but I felt like I could do better. But I made a deal with my parents that I would do at least 1 year of regular high school, and we could reevaluate afterwards. So I did 1 year of regular high school, and then I said I want to homeschool again, but I didn't quite push it as much as I could have. But then in the second year came the COVID pandemic, and so it was a lot easier to convince my parents to let me homeschool when school was entirely online anyway. I still finished out my sophomore year, which is the year that the pandemic started. And I technically did a little bit at the beginning of my junior year, also online, just regular high school. But then for pretty much all of my junior year, I was homeschooling myself. And so what I had done is I knew I wanted to go to college. And so I made sure to take classes where I could take AP exams, and then I might be able to get college credit for those, or at least put it on my record and show colleges that I was really studying. And I already known where I went to go to college, and so I was able to some extent. So I was able to customize my education to what I wanted to learn, which was obviously related to where I wanted to go to college. So I was able to put together a much better academic experience than I would have had staying at the high school I was at, which had more requirements, wouldn't have let me take certain classes earlier, and it would have just been more work than it was worth to stay in regular school. I was much more efficient on my own.
One of the things that you said in the piece that I read about you, or read by you, excuse me, you spoke to how, because you weren't just attending a public school, you were attending a school that was very selective, is considered prestigious in New York, one that actually your father had attended, and they had big plans for you to get into this school. And you had certain thoughts that you wrote about where you just thought you were aware of your lineage and the privilege and the access that you had to people in your family. You have scientists in your family, if I'm correct, if I'm remembering correctly. You have a very learning focused environment in your home. So you had access to all these things. And your piece that you wrote about, you spoke of, you had opportunities that not everybody necessarily has when applying to the school. And you saw from the get-go this kind of being a setup that was unequal. Is that correct? Is that a good paraphrasing of what your piece was about?
I mean, my perspective, like going into high school at first, I wasn't quite as aware of like most things as I am now, but I'd known that I wanted to homeschool, but I learned more about like the overall education environment, like once I was later into high school, which obviously was helped by the fact that I have a very education focused family. My dad's a teacher, my mom writes about education, does consulting and all that. So that was a great help later on.
Okay, and I give that context because I wanted to be clear that you have these ideas about education and you had an idea of what your options were. So, coming to the table and deciding to homeschool, you recognize that these are the requirements that the school has for me, but I have an idea of all the possibilities that learning can be for me and a direction that I want to take it. And just so do you mind sharing your age with folks?
I'm 18 now.
Okay, right. Because I think when I interviewed you, you were 16 or 17. And so Dr. Joy, Gregory's given us some context of how he came to homeschooling. Can you give us an idea of what your homeschooling experience was and what that looked like? Because if I'm remembering correctly, you were homeschooled off and on by your parents, and it was very early, started much earlier than high school. You're on mute.
True. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Yes, it is true that basically my parents homeschooled me on and off throughout my education in a variety of ways. They both were public school teachers. My mother taught at the elementary and middle school levels. throughout her career. My father was a high school teacher in the public school system. And similar to Gregory, I recognize that I did have a small degree of privilege in that my mother, not only was she a public school teacher, but her name is Dr. Linda Davis. Dr. Linda Davis also back then was an award-winning public school teacher. So she was the public school teacher who everyone wanted to learn about, who everyone wanted to get to her workshop. Everyone wanted to learn from Dr. Linda Davis. So I recognize that, you know, she clearly brought a lot to the table at home in terms of what she viewed as my strengths and weaknesses were as a student, and in terms of how she chose to educate me and when she chose to educate me. And in terms of when she chose to educate me, I attended a variety of various public and private schools throughout my trajectory. However, my mother particularly was very, very comfortable with taking me out of any school if she felt that I was being mistreated by the teachers, or if she felt like I was being treated unfairly. She was the first to pull me out if she thought that teachers weren't challenging me. So she definitely was the parent who was like, they're not challenging you 8 hours a day at school. I'm gonna take care of this. You stay home.
I'm laughing because she sounds so much like me. I know
Yes.
that's right. It's like, okay. So would you say, were you homeschooled for high school at any time?
On and off again. Again, it was on and off again, you know. And again, my parents just made it work for me as a student and them as parents. You know, whatever made sense at the time, we did. And I'm actually very grateful. You know, I think some parents think that when it comes to education, oh, you know, consistency. So if they start in private school, they have to finish in private school. Well, no, not if the teachers are belittling the child, not if the teachers aren't challenging the child, right? So my parents had the courage and the strength to say, if you're good 8 hours a day in the brick and mortar system, awesome. But if you're not, and if you as a child or teen are not happy, we have the skills and the ability to make it work for you. And they were very, very open to having me stay at home. And what did that look like? Basically, what it looked like was my mother in particular really was good at focusing upon my strengths. And even when I was an adolescent, she recognized that writing was a strength of mine, even that early on. So sometimes what that meant was her saying, okay, you're interested in writing poetry, do that and show me what you end up by the end of the week. And she would allow me to be creative for that week. And by the end of the week, you know, I would present to her 2 or 3 solid poems. And, you know, she was just so supportive in terms of nurturing my creativity as a young person, and for trusting me as a young person in terms of, if she gave me the freedom to say, okay, your talent is writing, write for me and show me what you have. She trusted me enough to say, you know, do that, present to me what you have. And when I presented her with what I had, she honored it, she embraced it. And she just made me feel like I could do anything.
I love how you speak to this role that creativity played in your homeschool experience, and how you were encouraged to really engage in learning that was interest led. So you liked writing. So what are these opportunities? Gregory, I know that your intro into homeschooling was a bit different, where you had to really convince your parents why this was a good path for you versus this school that they knew that you were going to graduate from. What did that look like? What went into convincing them that this was something that you had handled, and what was that transition like for you, moving from your traditional setting to now the self-directed learning pathway?
So what I had to do was I had to show them that the plan I had was better than what the plan for me was given by the school I was going to. And it was a lot easier to convince them of that once things went online and they thought things weren't going nearly as well as they did in normal years. And they didn't even think it was that great in normal years, but they just understood. My dad had gone there, my brother went there, they knew it would be a perfectly reasonable life trajectory to just finish that school, going to college, etc. So what I did is I just researched what the homeschooling laws are in New York. It was pretty straightforward. It's just like one page, well, a long web page. You can just read through all the rules, and that's all the rules. And so all you have to do is follow those rules. Anything else is up to you. So I did what I had to do. I made a home instruction plan. I showed to my parents. I explained to them how I was still going to be able to get into the colleges I wanted to go to. It was actually really funny because my parents wanted me to take like all these tests, like SAT subject tests. Those don't exist anymore. But back when I was trying to convince them SAT subject tests existed, and they were like, you're going to have to take some of these. But I took AP exams, and that was something for that. I didn't get nearly as creative. It wasn't as freeform. If I'd been doing it before high school, or if I was homeschooling my own child, it would have been more creative. But I took a pretty straightforward approach. I used normal textbooks. I also used Khan Academy stuff for a pretty linear, straightforward, just learning normal class material approach. And I think my parents were okay with that because they honestly knew that I could do better than Stuyvesant. My mom always believed that I could do better. She just didn't know how it would play out for my future. My dad needed a bit more convincing because he thought that without a formal high school diploma, my entire life would be ruined or something. But it doesn't really matter once you've gone to college. And I still got a high school equivalency diploma. So that he was actually surprised to see how information had changed for statistics on people who didn't go to high school. But
wow.
Yeah.
So you had to take the high school equivalency because that's the law in New York. Am I correct?
I didn't have to.
Okay.
So the reason I took it was because to be eligible for federal funds and financial aid in college, you either have to have graduated high school or have a high school equivalency. There also is technically a way you can have a homeschool diploma, but that would have been way more questionable. It was easier to just, well, it wasn't easy to take it. The ID requirements are ridiculous, but I did get a high school equivalency diploma.
Okay. So give us the news. What's up for the fall?
I will be going to Harvey Mudd College. I'm very much looking forward to it. It is my top choice college for a long time, and I think it's going to be great.
Wonderful. Did your homeschooling experience this past year and a half impact, or did they have questions or concerns given that you moved from Stuyvesant to becoming homeschooled? Did that impact or cause you any challenge?
Not really, because I have a very good understanding of the college application process. I knew someone who does that stuff professionally, and so I was able to put together an application relatively easily, and it all worked the way I expected it to.
I love it. I love it. So Dr. Joy, and thank you for sharing that, Gregory. And so you're on your way to college. You created this plan just as it's working out, just like you said, told your parents, right, Gregory? So Dr. Joy, when I read your bio, everybody knows now. And let me just tell you, Dr. Joy told me when I said, can I use the bio that I used last year? She said, of course you can, but just make sure that you put in there full professor, because between last year when I saw her at our teaching to now, she's been promoted to full professorship. So I want to start with you, and then I'm going to come back to Gregory. Tell us the ways that you know that your homeschooling experience impacted the success that you are now enjoying as an educator and a writer, and just the many lives that you're living currently professionally.
Sure, thank you. Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, I wanted to make it very clear there's a stark difference between associate professor and full professor. So So thank you for making that
Right,
change.
Dr. Joy be set me straight. Let's get it right now. Just so you know, I was like, yes, ma'am.
Yes, well, that's a great question you ask, Dr. Khadijah. You know, one thing that I think that my parents pouring into me, how it assisted me long term, even in terms of my career now and my career journey and where I am now, I think that one benefit is that I left their household valuing my own voice, because in the brick and mortar system, particularly since quite a few times I was placed in positions where I was the only Black child in the class, or I was the only Black girl in the class. So I was very accustomed to being the only in a setting. And sometimes, particularly back then, when you were the only person of African descent in a predominantly white setting, your voice was not always appreciated. Your voice was not always heard. Your voice was not always honored. And I think that because my parents used homeschooling and you used it as a way to literally protect me, to mentally, to intellectually protect me. I think because they used it in that way, and then when I was at home, they purposefully wanted me to share my voice. They purposefully honored my voice. They purposely said, this is a space where we want you to shine. We want you to shine in terms of what you're thinking, what you're saying, how you're saying it, right? With no judgment, with no repercussions if you're not perfect, you know? And I think that long term, for moving forward, basically boosted my confidence in terms of honoring my own voice and in terms of writing and speaking, you know? So if you look at my work throughout my career, you'll see that I'm not shy talking about a lot of issues that a lot of Black people are very shy to talk about. I can be in a predominantly white setting and I will talk about white privilege, anti-racism, you know, oppression all day long. Because when I was younger, no one said, tisk tisk, not in this setting. No, it was just the opposite. My parents said, not in this setting, come home. You can do it in this setting. And I think that that rewired my brain to have the confidence, to have the strength, and to have the intellectual know-how to address difficult issues, even when I am a minority in a setting, and to address it in ways that people in the white majority can understand and hear, but still take seriously. So I thank my parents for giving me that gift.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing that. And it makes me, you know, as I come to Gregory, it makes me think of how I even came to know about Gregory was through that voice. And so, you know, I'm led to believe that even before you began homeschooling, your parents created space for you to be honest with your voice, Gregory. And so it was that transitioning into curating your learning experience was just an extension of having the flexibility to and I think I believe I read another article that you wrote last year about the challenges of you being able to take the equivalency test because of the way that the New York State was just did not have it together. And you went and you got your pen and you wrote about the trifling mess that you had to go through in just in that process. So can you talk a little bit of how this homeschooling experience either led to you strengthening your voice, or in other ways that you feel that it's impacted and prepared you for now as you transition into college?
So I think one of the things that prepared me most for all that writing, did everything like that, really taking initiative on things, was actually a combination of two factors. One, the school I went to, K-8, was a very good school. It taught me to write extremely well. It gave me a lot of great skills, which honestly would let anybody basically coast through public high school. And then the second thing was, with all the experience I had in dance, it kind of taught me to just keep trying, even if you're constantly failing. It really gave me that kind of mindset to just keep going. I can do things because I've seen my improvement, and the work is hard, but I enjoy doing it. And so I definitely got that mindset from dance. And just those two things combined. And then once I had the academic background and skills to do that kind of writing, and the mindset to actually get things done, even when they're hard, as soon as I know what I want, I just go for it. That's what I think allowed me to really do everything and leave that path that my parents expected for me.
What was it like? How did your friends and your family respond to this new lifestyle now that you were engaging in homeschooling? You know, it's very different to what anyone else in your family, and you know, you're kind of like an outlier in this conversation because you were brought to homeschooling through yourself, not because your parents wanted to homeschool you or suggested it to you. What was that or those conversations like with family members and friends now that you're engaging in homeschooling, and how did you respond to that?
So most people in my age band, like my siblings, my peers at school, and most of the people I knew, they kind of expected that I do what I want to do. And so it wasn't that much of a surprise for them. It was, they thought I would, I don't know if they thought about it too much, but I know my parents, I think part of it is I was kind of doing what my mom had wanted to do, what she wished she could have been able to do when she was my age. And for my dad, he just didn't see why I had basically a perfectly reasonable life plan that I was already on. Everything was going fine. Why would I leave that? But I think eventually I was just convincing enough, or just the situation with online schooling was bad enough that he let me do this, and it worked out. Yeah, I think that's what it
is. Dr. Joy, did you have any, do you recall any pushback that you experienced from folks not really being familiar with this whole this homeschool thing? I know that I hear a lot of parents talk about how if it's not their own mindset, that is their obstacle, where, you know, believing that they can't engage their child in a homeschooling journey that's going to lead to them being successful, whatever success looks like in their mind, right? I also hear that a lot of the challenge is the pushback from family and friends that, like, you gonna mess that child up, what's this homeschooling mess, you know, all of that stuff. And I can say that I never encountered that at all. Like, I feel like people look at me like, Gregory, she gonna do what she gonna want to do, what she gonna do, why even say anything? And so if people had judgment, they didn't bring it to me. But what about you, Dr. Joy? Did you have any type of pushback or recall anything that your parents had to respond to when they decided to homeschool you?
In my reflection, I really cannot think of any. And again, I think part of that is because Dr. Linda Davis was an award-winning teacher. You know, if the city's award-winning teacher wants to homeschool her own child, everyone's like, yes, go for it. You know, she probably knows more than we do. So I think because of that unique situation, I really did not. And even moving forward, when I decided to homeschool my own son, I think my own position as a university faculty member who already was working with other youth, I think a lot of people were like, I didn't get any pushback. A lot of people were like, well, her educating her own child when she's already educating other people's children in math and science seems logical, and gosh, her son's really lucky. So I think because of that unique situation for our family, our history of being educators, period, we did not get any pushback or judgment. In fact, people were like, can you educate our children too?
Right. They
We'll
asked you,
pay you. Can you
right,
educate
can
our
we add? Yes, here you go. That
can we bring our kids to your house, Dr. Joy?
that's actually how I wound up homeschooling my nephew for a period of time, is that my sister got more flack than I, and I think it's for the same reasons. I've always worked with children. So it's, and I think that has a lot to do. I think that is unfair. I think it's unfair that folks who don't have an education degree or don't have this experience are automatically marked, given this stress of, what are you doing? Because I know that, and I'm sure you would agree, Dr. Joy, that a lot of the teaching really is about observing your learner and creating an experience that's relevant to them. It's not necessarily about having to be certified or anything like that. I want to, at this time, I want to allow our audience to ask questions. I don't see any in the chat. And so I'm going to ask, if you want to come off mute, you can ask a question. And put your hand up just so that we can call on folks so that everyone's not speaking at once. And I also want to ask kindly if you can keep your question succinct and then go back on mute. These are a lot of rules, I know, but because we're recording this, I just need for you to go back on mute so that it doesn't interrupt the transmission of the recording so we can hear. So are there any questions that anyone has for our guests? You learn now about what their entry was. I see Tanita, who was actually a speaker in our last session. Tanita, could you ask your question?
Hi, yes, I just wanted to know as a parent, I have my camera up, what would you tell your parents to do differently?
So let's start with, I see Gregory's face. So I'm gonna let him think on that a moment and also think of how to say it so he don't get in trouble. I don't know how close his parents are right now. But Dr. Joy, can you answer first? What would you tell them?
Well, first of all, I just want to honor Dr. Linda Davis, who probably will be watching this recording when it goes online, but I just want to honor her, my mother, Dr. Linda Davis, such a beautiful soul inside and out, who rocked it in terms of raising me as a Black woman. I want to thank Mr. Rochester Davis Jr., my father, I learned so many lessons from him, and he played a role in terms of the woman that I've become today. And the only thing I would say that I would have advised them to do differently, the only thing is to save your money for private schools. Mom and dad, you did not need to waste that money. I would have been fine at home that whole time.
Wow.
I think that's the only thing. I think that at the time they thought that I was gaining from some of those private school experiences, but looking back, a lot of my private school experience actually hurt me as opposed to lift me up, mold me, and uplift me. That's the only
how
thing.
valuable that is to hear. That is so meaningful for folks to hear
It
that.
comes from the heart. That's how I feel.
That's meaningful. Gregory, did you ready to respond?
So what I would say is something that parents don't generally like to hear that much, but I think I would advise them to trust themselves more, because in the situation I was in, I was already 16 years old. They've been raising me for 16 years. They had seen, they had deliberately put me in like the best school they could find to give me the best skills so that I could make the kinds of decisions that I was trying to make. And so they don't have to trust necessarily that I just somehow know what I'm doing, but I hope that they would trust that all the education they had given to me, all the ways that they had raised me, would make me into the kind of person where I would make the right decisions for me, and that they could trust that I had actually gained those skills that they had been trying to give me.
Wow. You know, that is so meaningful to hear. And mainly because the third person that was supposed to be here who's not is my daughter. And I don't know how she would be able to answer that question honestly with me. Like, I mean, I feel like I don't know how I would be able to receive it. I'd just be real without crying because I'm a crybaby or wanting to engage more. But I think that it's so important to hear that, Gregory, about trust. And Dr. Joy, to hear that about, it's the same thing. I think like you were good enough. You didn't have to keep putting me in private schools. Everything that I needed, I got when I was with you all. And that just, I hope that that is inspiring to everybody on this call who have reservations, who are wondering if you're good enough or if this is beneficial to the children. You know, unless they're begging you, please put me back in school, please. I don't want to be with you. Unless they're crying and sobbing about this, I think it's important for you to know that this is valuable. It's a question in the chat from Erica, who says, so Gregory mentioned dancing. What else did you do socially or to have interaction with other kids your age at the time?
Dance was pretty much it. That was 5 days a week, upwards of 17 hours a week. That was most of how I interacted with other people my age. I mean, I also had some friends from school and stuff that I'd see occasionally, but it was mostly dance.
Did you want to answer that as well, Dr. Joy? Do you, I was going to say, do you recall? I feel like that is insulting. Like you're so evolved from your child, so far removed from your childhood that you wouldn't remember. But what are some things that you can think of that you did? Because I think that this speaks to this idea of the importance of being around other kids and believing that that's mandatory. So can you talk a little bit about your experience?
Yes, and I think this also speaks to another question in the chat related to socialization. And basically, similar to Gregory, basically a very big part of my childhood also was dance. So basically, from the age of 11 until the age of 18, I was in a professional dance line. So what is a professional dance line? Just kind of picture a teenage equivalent of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. So our professional youth dance line would open up for performances like for Kool and the Gang and Mary J. Blige and things like that. We would be the opening act for them. So basically, being a part of that dance line and always being in rehearsal and always being on stage, the fellow dancers were my friends and were my colleagues, you know. So I definitely had interaction with other kids my age. It was primarily through dance, but it was definitely interaction. My parents also made sure that I participate in volunteer organizations. There was one specific volunteer organization that my mother was very active in, and I worked with her in volunteering with this organization. So that was more communicating with people across all age groups when you're volunteering. But I think that those were my main socialization venues, and it was consistent, regular, fun, and wonderful.
And I appreciate you bringing up that you didn't only just interact with people your age, that you were engaged in intergenerational opportunities. And that is something that we don't really see in traditional settings where, you know, people are able to engage with people that aren't in their age group in a way as peers, as opposed to it always being this dynamic of I'm older, I'm younger, or the teacher is older, the learner is younger. So we may come back to that, but I just wanted to pull that out of what you shared. Ayatollah Amaze ask a question. They say, I'm not able to unmute, but my question is the same one I had in a session yesterday. If you were homeschooling young children in this day and age and anticipating how different their world will be from our current one, how would you go about it? What would be different or similar to what your parents did with you? Gregory, did you want to start?
This is very speculative. It's about if I was homeschooled. I'm not sure I can really answer this because I don't have children, and the future, when I have children, will be so different from the future. So yeah, I'm
Okay.
not sure.
Okay. Is there anything you're doing currently, Dr. Joy, that you were intentional about doing differently because of your own experience?
I think that the main thing that I'm doing and I'm being intentional about as I'm homeschooling my own son, that I don't think my parents were intentional about it. They did an awesome job, but they were not intentional about it, was how, as I'm educating my son, one thing I'm thinking about is making sure that he leaves the household with both life skills and self-care skills, all right? So, you know, I left home knowing how to rock a poem. I can write you an award-winning poem in a minute. I would do choreograph a dance, an award-winning dance, and perform in front of thousands of people in a minute. But I was not aware of, okay, Joy, let's balance this checkbook. So in terms of like life skills, those are things that I basically didn't learn until I was in college. So now what I'm doing is I'm being more intentional now, and with my son saying, you don't have to wait until college to learn about investing, to learn about managing your bank account. Even though you're in middle school, I'm going to teach all of this to you now, so that like me, you don't have to wait until you're 18, 19 to figure it out. So he's a very financially savvy 13-year-old, yes.
That's
Can I just add something?
yes, I was going to come
So
back to you. Yeah.
I think that made me realize that if I was homeschooling a child now, I think I'd put a lot of emphasis on media literacy and navigating digital information, so that even if I don't know something and they don't know something, they can still find it out accurately from the resources that are available, like on the internet for the most part, or even in the world too. I think that's very useful. Yeah.
If you weren't so if you weren't holding fast so much to the plan you had laid out for yourself when you engaged in this journey from the beginning, looking back, Gregory, do you think that there'll be some things that you would implement in your journey that you didn't get a chance to do early on?
Honestly, I'm pretty happy with how things were. I'm not, I'd have to think long and hard about what I would have wanted to do differently.
Okay. And me just being nosy, what kind of dance do you study?
So I studied ballet, flamenco, and modern dance.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So I want to leave space for one more question before we close out this amazing session. This is the first session that we've ever had with homeschooled or formerly homeschooled folks on the panel. And I'm reading the chat and folks are loving this. They're like, yes, media literacy. Yes, it's extremely important. Yes, to ballet and flamenco. Ebony I just feel her energy all the time in every session. She said, yes, to college and balancing that budget is so true. Yes, to media literacy. So do we have someone who has a final question before we close out this session? All right. Well, I think that this was a really robust conversation that, what you can expect in 45 minutes. And Gregory, I just think that you are just such, I think you are an outlier in many ways, but I think that your voice and your ability to articulate your experiences make you not only a leader among your peers, but really someone who, as parents and people much older than you, can really pay attention to give us guidance, especially if we are to consider ourselves educational leaders. I think that you continue to bring up very valid and important things for us to look at as older people. And I appreciate you being part of these intergenerational spaces to share your thoughts and your ideas. And I'm so incredibly proud of you. And, you're so responsive when I reach out to you. And I just appreciate, and I wish you so much. I wish you the best in your journey. Do you have a Cash App or something that you can put in the chat in case folks want to support you on your college journey?
Not currently. I think I'll be okay.
Okay, so look, he's not, so you may not want to give a Cash App, but would you like people to donate to your organization?
It doesn't really do money donations, so
Look,
I'm not
okay.
advertising
All right,
anything.
Gregory forever not trying to get me to get folks to give him stuff. This was the same thing during our interview. He was like, I'm good. Like, if you get off my back. But I'm going to include somewhere where you can learn more about, because we got absolutely no time talking about what Gregory did while he was homeschooling was that he started an exchange where he was getting tech that people no longer were using to be able to share it with children in traditional schools still, even though he had decided he was homeschooling. But when we went virtual and folks needed laptops and things to be able to engage in virtual learning, he created an exchange. And that's what his organization is that it creates this exchange for people who can't afford technology to be able to get it from people who are willing to donate it. So I'm going to share in the announcement, the closing announcement for the teach-in, a link to his organization in case you do have technology that you would like to donate. Is that okay, Gregory? Is that okay? Can I do that, please?
I mean, that's okay. It's only for people in New York City. I'm not sure how many of us that is, but that's fine.
You see, Gregory just trying to stop me from trying to help. Okay, but I'm going to share. So if you're in New York City, then this will be something that you can donate to. And Dr. Joy, there's no end to my love for you. I feel like we're sisters in the movement. You were there from the very beginning of the teach-in, and you continue to be accessible and available, sharing your story. I do want to give a shout out to your chapter in our book, where you are actually talking about the method of homeschooling. You actually created a model that you are implementing with your son, but also from pulling from your own experiences as a homeschooled child, the things that went into making this not only a model to implement, but one that I feel is spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, as well as academically cohesive for teaching a Black child. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I will briefly take the moment, if anyone would like to support the Circle of Excellence. The Circle of Excellence is an organization that I started where I specifically center upon consulting and working with Black homeschooling families and coaching young people who compete in science competitions. So
Yes.
one of my side hustles is I'm an award-winning science fair coach. My kids often win first and second place in international and national science fairs. So that's what I do when I'm not being a professor. I'm a science fair coach. So.
I love that. And so, and that's something that you and Gregory have in common, because he's a scientist as well. I think of all the things that he does. So for both of you, if you wouldn't mind going to the group chat on our teaching site. And if anyone that's been watching this and wants to connect with either Gregory or Dr. Joy, you have questions, and if both of you can provide links, if you do want folks to connect with you or support your ventures, if you can put that in our group chat on the teaching site so that it exists beyond this chat that's in the Zoom, if that makes sense. So don't put it in the Zoom, Dr. Joy, put it in the on the teaching site so that it has a longer lifespan, okay? And so I'd like to thank everybody for participating today in our session. I hope that you learned a lot from these formerly homeschooled folks, and I hope to see you in our last session of the day that starts at 4 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.